to our 8th of 10 webinars in our 2025 Women in Leadership Executive Speaker Series. And this one is titled Women in Policy, Strategy, Politics, and Change. I put 4 words in there because we can go in different directions, and our guest today is in all of those areas. I'm Dr. Susan Madsen, founding director of the Utah Women in Leadership Project. I'm also the Karen Hayne Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership in the John M. Huntsman School of Business at Utah State University. And I'm the host and will be interviewing our guest today. Now, this event furthers the mission of the Utah Women in Leadership Project, which is to strengthen the impact of Utah girls and women. And we have for years, we serve Utah and its residents by first producing relevant, trustworthy, and applicable research. And Maura and I were just talking about that. And second, creating and gathering valuable resources. And then third, convening trainings and events like this that inform, inspire, and ignite growth and change for all Utahns. So there's always a reason about the change and how can we do better with all of the things that we do at the Utah Women in Leadership Project, and now with a bolder way forward as well. So thanks to our sponsors here at Utah State University, the John M. Huntsman School of Business, and also Utah State University Extension. And so I'd like to jump right in and introduce our guest. So Maura Carabello. I never say your name right.
That's all right. That's all right.
Maura Carabello is the founder and president of Exoro Group, a recognized communications policy and strategy group based in Salt Lake City, Utah. And she's been doing that since 2002. I didn't know it had been that long. So
Yeah.
she is an advisor and strategist to Utah's top elected officials, nonprofit change agents, and business leaders. And her experiences span development work in Uganda, Time Magazine in New York City. She's been the director of several nonprofits, as well as leading hundreds of regional, national, and state campaigns and initiatives. And so I've known this for years that she's been a well-known speaker and trainer and sought-after advisor and trusted problem solver. And she's known for seeking counsel from both sides of the political spectrum, which is really a talent, and getting to be even a bit more what's the word? More needed talent along that spectrum, and from many different sectors of advocacy, policy, and positions of influence. And of course, as you can imagine, she's a regular guest on like KUTV, CBS, weekly podcast, Take Two. I've actually seen you on PBS, Utah Hinckley Report, as well as a frequent contributor to NPR and other news outlets. And just a couple more things. Her company publishes a really important guide for the Utah State Legislature, as well as other manuals for public engagement in the caucus and convention systems. And a few other things I pulled out that I thought were really important for people to know before we start our discussion is the power of advocacy and Mara's deep desire to improve the world in which we live are what drive her. And so she's led hundreds of campaigns, both issue and candidate, and secured close to $1 billion in public and private funding for clients, and been in the center of complex policy discussions and highly controversial projects. And so, to conclude, the best compliment she can remember is when a client said they chose to engage her because she had achieved that blend between respect and influence. And that's powerful. So thank you so much for coming and joining us today.
Thank you. That was quite a welcome. Thank you.
You
That's a
know, we
lot.
have to make those bios, but since we just have one of you today, sometimes I have two guests, but
Yeah.
I really wanted to dig into some of these things. And I really was quite thoughtful on using all four of those words in the title, which really relate to the work that you do and
Yeah.
you're passionate. And honestly, especially in Utah, you don't see as many women in this space. But
No,
this
it's
is
rare.
something that obviously I talk a lot, Mara. I don't know if you've heard me, but about head, heart, and hands. What's interesting to think about, what we feel passionate about, and what we like to do. And you must feel those three for all of the work that you're doing.
Yeah. It's absolutely true. You have to keep evaluating. The trick in politics is not losing your way, right?
Mm.
And if you're competitive, it's hard to not lose your way because you start to value other things, the winning of the moment, um, the negotiation. One of the key parts of getting something across the finish line is to negotiate. But how do you know when you've negotiated away too much? How do you, that is a value? And just really, how do you keep your energy level up, right? How do you keep energized about engaging in what is a full contact sport when it comes to politics and public policy? And I always separate those two, right? I mean, maybe it's just semantics I'm leaning on, but I always want to be clear and when I am doing political strategy and when I'm doing what I think is the best public policy, and I don't want to lose track of the policy in the
Mm.
politic.
Yeah, and some of these topics, the controversial ones especially,
Yeah,
and there's all kinds of those going on right now, are you have to just be thoughtful to stay in that space of research, logic in some ways, but passion as well. So I read your bio, pieces of it, and it's longer, and people know those pieces, but tell us a little bit more about your career because we started with Uganda
yeah, yeah.
and we're ending with where you're at now. So how did you get to where you're at now? And tell us a little bit about your education along the way as well.
Utah State Aggie. So
Ah,
we'll start there. Behavioral psychology was
oh,
so the family trade is therapy, where everybody in my family is a therapist. I assumed I'd be a therapist, but just as an aside, if you want to become a political consultant, you should get a degree in behavioral psychology, right? Like, I mean, that's didn't intend it. So I always feel like there's two ways to go with this answer, and I'll be brief, but I want to go down both roads. So one is which you've already done well for me, which is um, my studies are in poli sci dance. I got a dance minor,
what?
and yeah, and which I think is really important. I mean, I'm sort of to capture the political zeitgeist right now in Utah. I would say I'm a big believer in underwater basket weaving degrees. I'm a big believer in learning how to think as part of your education.
The
So
liberal arts. Yeah.
yes, and I think that they teach, and when I employ thinkers, and I will teach skills. So that's a political aside, but so psychology, and I assumed I would be a therapist, but I also got a dual degree in political science because I just was in because I just kept taking the classes. And then I am proud of the work I've done. And you can go through my resume, and I'm proud that I've been the executive director of three nonprofits. And frankly, I moved to Uganda because I was planning to go to law school. For those who are lawyers and going to law school, that is amazing. And I'm not trying to, but I found for me that I was worried I would get on a treadmill that I wouldn't get off of, and
Yeah.
that I
Yeah.
tend to be very upwardly driven, and I would choose validators in my career that wouldn't work for me. So on quite a whim, I left and went with the Peace Corps had shut down because Uganda was really volatile at the time. It was controlled by Idi Amin had just left. So I went with a nonprofit for a couple of years and did women's issues, microeconomics, and he was really into micro development and student study issues. So it
That
was,
was right out of college then?
yep, it was instead of law school. And it was a great I mean, it was a theme of kind of following your gut, even though, you didn't know. I came back, assumed I would stay in nonprofit. Nonprofits are what I love. And did that. I was able to do some fun things. I did a couple of State Department exchanges. I was the director of the Centennial Commission for
Oh,
Utah. I did a coast to coast whistle stop train with Time Magazine. I worked in New York some great things on the resume. But I think that's if that's one track, that's some sense of the work I've done.
Yeah.
I think the other track is, you meet someone and I've been lucky to have this company for 20 years. We were the first public policy only firm. I started it. We're bipartisan. I'm slightly left of center and female. So really, and we have mostly Utah clients, several national ones, and certainly work regionally. And what I would say is the backside of that sort of sanitized resume is I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. I was in a field of public policy. Now I'll look back and put labels on it, public policy, communications. And it wasn't like I got a degree in accounting and knew what it was to be several kinds of financial assistance. And so one of the things I'm pleased with that we don't talk about is it's okay to not quite know what's next. And like that
Yes.
should not be a mental prohibitor. You
Yeah.
know yourself, you're developing your own skills. And I do use the word follow my passions, but I think the asterisk I would put on that is following your passions. One doesn't assume you'll be happy every day, right? I think
Mhm.
sometimes for me, I listen and I think, you're happy all the time? Because I'm not. I'm sometimes grumpy. I'm
It's hard
sometimes
work. So some of this is
yeah, it's hard
hard.
work to do what you want, but it is believing your gut. It
Mm,
is finding something that in preponderance fills your cup and not drains your cup,
mm.
and makes you energized and doesn't zap your energy. Now, any given Tuesday, it's going to zap your energy,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
overall, and so one of the reasons, candidly, that Exoro exists is that I was not someone who had the discipline to sit in my basement doing consulting on my own. I needed to say hi to somebody. I needed someone to ask me where I got my shoes. And so I formed a company in part because I work better as a group and I work better in systems and group things. And I couldn't find anyone I wanted to work for all the time. I found out about myself that I was passionate about advocacy, but I needed the subject matter to change. I respect those people
Mhm.
who work for years in a single subject matter. But that was an example of something that was draining me. I was running this nonprofit and I loved the work, but I thought I cannot, my temperament, I would just keep, I was getting more and more frustrated from having the same conversation. So I was able to take what I was clear about in terms of advocacy and change the subject matter. My point being, look at
That's
people.
so
Yeah.
important.
Yeah.
That's
And resumes are important, but it's also important to know that a lot of us felt our way through it, right? Like
yeah.
didn't have a path, didn't know at all times what we wanted to do.
I would have been bored. I mean, I'm in I do all my work around women and scholarship, all of those. But within that, I found very driven to do domestic violence, to do entrepreneurship, so the topics are all over the place, but they all relate to strengthening women. But
Yeah.
I love that you had that start in working with women as well. I didn't know that piece as well. But I love your comment about knowing yourself enough, at least a piece that you
Yeah.
wanted to do some advocacy. Is that what you said? That
Yeah.
that you knew you needed to be in that space and then just start moving.
Start moving. And we get so fixed, even more now than 30 years ago when I was making these choices on what's your life plan and if you know that, oh my gosh, run with it. Like I'm just saying I was not one who was clear. And so then where could I decision make? I could decision make about how I like to spend my time, where my talents were, which may not be where your passions are actually, but what was I good at? And continuing to just make the choices in front of me. I think
Yeah.
the biggest thing is movement. I use a term, I think successful people are people who have a bias towards action and
Mm,
really thinking of taking action. So action comes with risk. And what you pretty soon realize is now we get into these sort of tropes, but risking and losing is not the worst thing, and you have to get over that. I mean, I generate ideas every day. I've had team members who say, "Well, you don't know, Maura, because you don't get criticized." I'm thinking, "Holy cow, I get criticized all day." Like, my clients do nothing but say, "Bad idea, bad idea. Oh, good idea." It's about the action. It's about jumping in, putting yourself out there, having ideas. If we want to just talk about getting ahead in a public space, do not be afraid of being the person who has the idea. Now,
Yeah.
here's what'll happen. The group will take apart the idea, reconfigure the
And
idea,
you got to be okay with that.
and you might be, your internal voice might be like, oh, dang, that was stupid. And nope. You, the people who have the ideas, they generate response, confidence, and this bias towards action, I think is a really nice mantra to drive
I
you
love that.
through a windy path.
So I want to give a little bit of information about research on women with exactly what you've said. First of all, women are more perfectionistic than men, and women are more perfectionistic in Utah than women in general. That we won't get into details of that. But when you have more perfectionistic tendencies, you tend not to act as much. You
Yeah,
were just talking about that. But the research on gaining confidence and your voice means you can only get confidence if you act. So are you following me? So if we don't act because we're too worried about perfectionism, then we actually don't get more confidence. And actually being okay failing and succeeding, we're usually okay with succeeding. um, but we give everyone else the credit, right?
that's
um,
right.
but that's actually how you get more confidence and get towards action. I love what you just said.
Another way I've thought about this when I've done some how to be influential with women's groups, and I'll just share two thoughts that are very plain spoken because I love applicable thinking, and it just piggybacks on what you said. One is, one advice I say is take a seat at the table, literally and figuratively.
Yeah.
Never support yourself. Never, never, never. It doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve others. And it really doesn't serve you. You can be non-egotistical, you can not be a jerk, and you can take that seat at the table. And that's the number one thing I,
Socialize not to
yep,
take a seat at the table, so we have to be intentional.
and it doesn't feel right when you do it. That's the thing. You
Yeah.
have to, and you have to observe others and think about how harsh you are on yourself. And the people you admire, you're not harsh with at all. And even though you look and think she or he didn't do that, if you really looked at the behavior, they're risk taking, they're being told no, they maybe shouldn't be at the table. And we've all been there where you've limited your opportunity. And then you become a part of the group. And then you're like, these were the schmoes that got in, and I limited myself because I assumed someone knew more than me, had more experience, deserved it more than me. And then I actually get into whatever group and think, holy, like this is it. These are the people. So one is like take that seat at the table, even though you're uncomfortable, even though your self-critic is saying you haven't earned it yet. And then the second thing is just what you were talking about, Susan. I had a friend, a really smart woman, tell me this, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about it. And she said, we're all in a spectrum, right? We're all, and so this is about finding the balance. But if I say it sort of overarchingly, women assess their value by what they do, men assess their value by who they are. And we have to
Mm,
balance that. If we're always feeling like the only way we can get to the table is by producing something, and that's anywhere from I will bring the cookies and treats to I have to have these Gantt charts and I have to create value
yeah.
for you tangibly. Now, this is important to do. I'm not, it's a scale. So where women have the advantage is we tend to be doing driven. We tend to be production driven.
Yeah.
But where we shortchange ourselves is not just valuing our voice, our wisdom, our opinions, and ourselves as
Uh,
people. And if you can figure out how to start not only bringing what you do to the table, but just who you are is enough to create value. I think for me, those are sort of some things I think about when I decide how to be influential. These are, for me, these are pedals to push when you're trying to gain influence. And the reason to be influential If you're mapping to your ego on influence, then forget about it. Like, then take that garbage out on social media. But if you're mapping to influence because you want to be the best advocate for the things you care about, then you have to care about being influential. You don't have to do it for your ego, but strategically, it matters if you're influential. It just matters.
It does. And I have to say that sometimes in Utah, depending on audiences I'm speaking to, I use the word leadership and sometimes I use influence because we're a little more comfortable with that. But we need to be comfortable with power, all of those hard words.
Totally.
Because just taking what you're saying about influencing is power.
Right.
And power can get, if we have a powerful voice, if we have power in terms of, we know certain people that have influence, we can use that for good. We
Yep.
can.
Yep. It's
So,
totally true. I mean, and we take away our own power more than anyone takes it away from us. And it's because we've been taught, and it's because it works for us. And
yeah,
it's because, like, those bumper stickers that say, powerful wild women, what? No, you will not be reinforced. Sometimes they'll think you're a jerk. So, like, whatever. That's not your North Star. Your North Star is not bad. Your North Star is doing what you're doing. And I mean, one way to say, well, if you're thinking that's not realistic, Mara, I know the world in which I live in. I know how it works when I try and assert power. I would just say one of the things that I spend a lot of time on is how we experience each other. So there's verbal and there's also nonverbal.
yeah,
And and there's also, like, when we talk about power, I think people think of a personality type. They think of gregarious, they think of external. We've got to redefine what power is. We've got
yeah.
to redefine it. And if you're worried, I'm blunt. I'm not from Utah originally, and I've really had to work on my structure of bluntness where I just think I'm being a good Irish Italian communicator. People are gasping at me. I'm like, okay, too blunt. But one of the things also is how you say it. Are you too intense for people? Nonverbal, and you all have
Yeah.
probably plenty of experience in this, but Googling sort of nonverbal strategies. Remember, most of us relate to people nonverbally a long time before we listen to what they say. So when you're thinking about how do I bring it? How do I bring what I want and not alienate? Well, the answer to that is find out who you are nonverbally, found out how to be open and actually maybe even code switch, maybe even fit
There's
into
some
the
good
culture.
books out there. I
Oh,
was in the interpersonal communication space. There's all kinds of good stuff, probably TED Talks too.
totally. And that's how women can be both powerful and
Yeah.
assimilate. And because we have to do both, right? We're going to do twice as much, get half as much, and we're going to crush it.
Absolutely. And what I wanted to say to the listeners today is what we're talking about takes practice. And if you're not used to being direct or using your voice in settings where there's 10 men and only one or two women, practice doing it. And even if it doesn't go like exactly the way you wanted, give yourself, you did it. You spoke up. That's your win. So you can do, the next day time you can practice a little bit more. But don't beat yourself up. That's not helpful.
No,
Um,
the win is the doing. And I love this because it's always in your control. So much, particularly when we talk about politics, public policy, um, power, uh, it, how you come, like you offering an idea, even when you're not confident,
yeah.
and even if you're not been on
Men
the
do that all the time. Can I just say that?
all the time. And that's why we don't, because we're sitting and listening and going, oh, that's stupid. I'm not going to be the next stupid person. Don't if see
Or we're
your
waiting
inner
to be
critic.
perfect.
Yep, your inner critic's got to go away. And you will find that once you ignore it for a while, it does go away, except, when you're
Yeah.
tired and hungry. But like it goes away. It is a practice, it is a muscle. But policy, strategy, politics, and change, it's a participation sport. And you don't have
Oh,
to sound like anybody else. You don't have to not, you can be, if you're sort of soft in your approach, be soft in your approach. But what you have control over is whether you're stepping up and offering it. And at first, it'll hurt a little bit if your offering wasn't received the way you want. And pretty soon, you'll realize that the offering is just the conduit. It's not the victory. It's how you get into it.
Ooh, that's really good. I really like what you just said. That is so important. And by the way, the research is clear that introverts can be leaders and
Absolutely.
influential. And if you are an introvert, married to an introvert, have a kid that's an introvert, if you have not read the book Quiet, research based, I would recommend that. And do you know who the first person that told me that about that? Her name was Becky Lockhart.
Oh,
She was
makes
a
sense.
friend and
Yeah,
she loved that book. And so I bought it. This was so many years ago. She's passed,
right.
oh, 15, I don't know. It's a while ago now.
Yeah. In
10
fact,
years.
yeah, we just celebrated our.
Anyway, so that's good. So believe it or not, we're still on the first question.
Holy
We're
cow. Yeah,
We've had a
sorry.
nice discussion, though. I hopefully people are enjoying this discussion because I think it's great. So in your bio as well, it describes you as being one of the quote, one of the most influential people you've never heard of. So
Mhm,
let's talk about this notion of, we've talked mostly in this conversation about visibility
yeah.
or being known, but are there some advantages in your work? Have you found that there's some advantages to being influential behind the scenes? And are there disadvantages to that as well?
Yeah, I think they're both. That was a comment that someone said to me years ago. I maybe since then I've done a lot more media, and maybe it's an unfair thing now, but I think the notion, the sort of tense notion, the controversial notion there is this current feeling of you need to be known, and known is sort of an ID, a name ID thing. Like I'm sorry, I'm being very, and there's some value in that. We know that familiarity is comfort. When we know people, even if we know them because they're horrible, we forget that part and we're like, oh, I know that person. It's why we vote for people. It's the most familiar is usually who gets our vote. So I deeply believe in name identification, but I don't practice it very much. People ask me why the Exoro group doesn't have more social media. Well, here are my choices. I have built trust with my clients and we help them with the hardest of hard things. So my choices are, if it's interesting and juicy, it's not appropriate for social media. Or now I'm just reposting things, then I don't like that. I think those are empty calories. So we're a communications firm and we're often building communication channels for people. So I want to acknowledge that value and
Yeah.
acknowledge how familiarity really gets you someplace. But I want to challenge that as the only means in modern America to be influential or to make a difference.
Mhm.
And my clients need to respect me and I need to be peers and I need to be equal. And we're not servants of them. But I found that I'm okay if I can be influential, if I can help shape the things I care about. And I don't know that I need everyone to know who I am. I need
Mm.
everyone I work with to respect me. I need the respect I deserve at the table. I'm not in service. And one of the best values we've heard back is I will always tell people my truth. And I say it that way because maybe I'm wrong, but I will never just tell you that as the emperor, your clothes look great. So
Mm.
that relationship of trust, what I think has come to with influence, part of it for me has worked because I didn't need the spotlight.
Mm.
We were working on their agendas and their problems and their names. So I had a spotlight, I had the respect and the notoriety I wanted in the circumstance, but I don't know if it's necessary for my name to be in the headline and in the spotlight. And just separating those two things, that you're not taking a seat back. You're not sort of owning your own space, but I think we're too prearranged right now to think that we needed to be really external about our notoriety and external about our name recognition. So it was an observation made of me, and I hadn't thought of it until that. And I thought, I haven't spent a lot of time on people knowing who I was.
was getting over a cough the last week or two. So if I cough and disappear for a minute, just keep talking, okay?
Fair enough.
Hopefully it'll pass a little bit. But the last couple of webinars, I've had some struggles with that. But so uh, uh, on your website, it says winning hearts and minds isn't marketing or public relations. I think it goes along. It takes strategy and behavioral integration to reach success. So talk a little bit more about how you build strategy and that behavioral integration.
So one of the key things we do with every client is we'll ask them what their objective is. And that always seems like the easiest question. But figuring out what you want is half the battle. So I'll give you an example. We'll get with someone, and if someone's objective is we want everyone to love our industry. Nope, that's not a really great objective. It's too broad. We want to, I'll move it to a social issue. We want everyone to recognize, we were just talking about systemic bias. That may be too broad of an objective. Accomplishable, clear, precise objectives is a really good starting place. And then you actually strategize first. We very seldom operate here without a game plan. Now, it immediately starts to change, but what it does is here's the key to victory in the public space: stay at it. It's not, but staying at it is incredibly difficult. And
Perseverance,
yep,
like
it's the differentiator.
relentless.
And you're going to go through dips and you're going to go through highs. And so stick to itiveness, but that requires a strategy. And strategy allows you to think through variables, to back out your assignments, to be realistic about coalition members, realistic about influencers, channels, and you map all that out. And that's an act of clear eyed, bright eyed, non emotional. And then you start playing, you get into it and emotions come in and circumstances change, but you always have this strategy. You always are mapping to your ultimate objective. You're not getting confused about your objective. And then again, I would say one of the things I have learned is now advocates, there are two kinds of advocates, and they're both equally important. One is those who are speaking truth to power. You're raising and elevating an issue. Something's not being talked about and it needs to be talked about. And until we get to that, we almost can't do the second. But what I distinguish is speaking truth to power, giving voice to voiceless is really important. But it in of itself is not systemic change. Showing up Tuesday night at a city council meeting is change. Liking something on social media is raising and elevating an issue. It's so important to raise and elevate issues you care about. But liking something on social media is not creating the change in the system. So passing a law, creating an ordinance, changing someone's mind, behavior is change. Voice is power. So they both matter. I'm not preferencing one, but we confuse it. We say, we held a rally and we told them. And I'm like, that was so important. It was so important. But it didn't change the statute. It didn't codify for the next generation. It did not protect beyond the moment. So knowing what behavioral change. The other thing that I do a lot is separate the person and the action. So we were just talking
That
about
is an amazing skill, and I'm sure you learned a lot about that in your therapist, your whole family.
That's right. So people often say, how do you work with those people that you don't agree with? Well, because I've decided I don't need you to agree with me. I need you to do what I want you to do. And those are not the same thing. So I work with some people that
parenting, that's a good thing to know for parenting.
Totally. And yet all of these are easier said than done. So when you really want to make change, forget about getting people in leadership or in positions of change. Who cares if they believe what you believe? Get them to do what you want them to do. And that is a road that very seldom gets shut down. Getting people to agree with me, that is a pretty hard wall to climb over sometimes, but finding something that they could do that ultimately led to the change or the worldview I want to see is actually a more sustainable path.
That is such a good insight. Um, because
The
we see it
survival
the other
instinct.
way though, don't we? We
Yeah,
we try to get the belief system and some of that, yeah, no, it's all important, right? But
totally.
if they will at least do something, and you see that in the legislature and
Yeah,
in business, I mean, in pretty much anything that we're trying to move change, which could be raising kids, right?
right.
It could be about any,
Yeah.
but if they'll do what you need them to do, um,
You don't give up the other, right? Like there are times and places where you want them, and there's times for academic dialogue, theoretical dialogue. There's also times for discovering and exploring. Like it's not to say no to the other, but I find in this hyper tribal environment,
yeah.
tribalism is what I say and how I characterize my enemy, and it tends to be really high level and it's absolute. You're bad, I'm good. And policy is not like that. And yet
Mm,
you don't want to compromise. You're like, I refuse to wear that tribe's t-shirt. And like, so how do I even work with the other tribe when I find them repugnant and I find what they say so contrary to my values? So
mm,
that's a mind space to stay in. I'm just saying it's not a mind space that changes statutes. So
mm,
mine is I don't have to accept. You're right. I'm very far apart from you. And there are when I build trust, I can actually maybe start to change their hearts and minds. But until then, why don't I just change behavior? Why don't I just change
yeah.
statute? Why don't I just change process? And in
Mm,
order to
mm.
do that, I protect who I want to protect and I advocate for what I want to advocate for. But it's also a little more transactional. It's a little more like, are you okay with 7 instead of 5?
Yeah.
And it doesn't require me to characterize you. It doesn't require me to make you good or bad. It allows for space there. And in an increasingly tribal environment, tribalism doesn't work for anybody. It doesn't work for the advocates. It just doesn't. It's not, it's emotive, it's fierce, but it's
And
not
it's not
productive.
dignity. So,
No.
I'm in conversations a lot with Tammy
Yeah. And I
Pfeiffer.
think you and I both sit on the Dignity Index's board. And
Yeah, yeah.
yeah,
So it's but you can listen, and I'm still working on this myself, okay? I'm not perfect at any of this, but you can listen and respect a piece of that to really treat people with dignity. Um, I don't know. It's a complicated thing, and it's gotten worse, I think, in the past y- year, but even in the past 6 months, right?
but if you're if you're focused on what you want from them as change, like I have a couple of folks I know on the call, so hi to those. Anyone who knows me knows I'm up for a good fight. I am not, I am Irish. I love the conflict. I'm so not Utah. I'm like, yes, let's fight. But
That
when I
is
get to
not
that,
Utah.
it's small f fighting. Like I don't personalize it.
Mm,
Um, and, and if you trust me, and if you know my ask of you is going to, as an elected official particularly, if you know my ask is going to be reasonable and taking you into account, then we can have these kind of nice ideological fights and they're
yeah.
received. They're received. If all I want to do is wave my tribal banner, what I will just say is it's bad strategy. It may feel good, it's just bad strategy. It doesn't get you where you want to go, in my experience.
Thank you so much. And I'm going to throw a question. It's fun to watch your face because you get so excited about certain
Do,
things. And
do.
so in your work, especially or life, um, what brings you the most joy? Like what are those things that you do in your day or that you after they happen, you just smile. You're like, oh, that was a bit of joy in my life.
So, accomplishment really matters. And this is going to sound cheesy because again, I'm not sort of a, oh, it's about you, not me. I'm totally about me. But when people when you've laid out a strategy and it happens, when you see the change, I love that so much. I
Oh,
love I love the achievement. But remember, I'm okay with incremental as well. Like I've so that I love to problem solve.
oh,
I love that people by and large come to us with, we only work with so smart people. And so it's not about remediating with them, it's about they know so much, but they don't know how to get here. And we often say, like, our main job at Exoro is to take a blank piece of paper and write a map. And so it's hard work and it makes your head hurt because it's thinking and it's not rote. But I love to come up with solutions. Like, it really energizes me. And then I love the verbal. Clearly, verbal is my love. And verbal is where I love to sit with someone and help them map out where and how we're going to get them to something. I mean, it is a joy, and I'm okay that no one knows it, but our team, so there are four things at Exoro that I look at to see if we're on track. And one is, are we being the best? Mediocrity is killing us. Mediocrity is killing us. Going along to get along, being fine, being like, don't sticking your head up, not having the fight. Mediocrity kills. So be the best. Like, continue to say, was it okay? That doesn't matter. Was it the best? Like, that matters, that you care about being the best. The other thing is details matter. So I am always saying, are we really, if you can't get the small stuff, you can't get the big stuff. That's probably
Oh,
hand in glove with be the
I
best.
believe that. And sometimes people
Yeah,
shift that aside, but details matter.
totally. And then the third thing I ask myself is, are we doing something that matters? Are we focused on big ball? Are we playing small ball? Are we being petty? Are we focused on the big stuff? And then the final thing, and remember, I'm a political consultant, the final thing is character counts. Did I will give up the win for doing what's right. And
Mm,
right isn't a fixed position. In politics, right is sometimes very hard to figure out, but it is the
it
act.
really is.
It matters if you care, if you have character. You may make a
Mm.
mistake, but I have to ask myself, are we being character first? So those are sort of the four things. And so, like, Susan, like, I look and say, those are also what energizes me. Like, we came together with a strategic plan. We were competitive. We want to win, but it had character. It solved a problem. Getting someone, I get so energized about helping people with their problems. I also say it drains me sometimes. We fail
It's
and
hard work, though.
really,
It
anyway,
is
yeah,
hard work. Yeah,
totally. So,
I am similar in many ways because I mean the Boulder Way Forward is a huge challenge. We're trying
that's
to
right.
shift Utah, but
That's right.
sometimes we do like challenges. Not maybe not all, like a complicated teenager did not
Totally.
make me really happy to
Yeah.
try and resolve that. But when you know that you have a good mind that can hear, listen, think, that you know how to bring people together, that it finds you find joy in doing that. I love that. There's a question I'm gonna bring in a few from um, listeners today is what one change are you most proud of? And how did you enact that change? And if you're comfortable, is there a story behind that?
So I'm going to skirt the question a little bit and then I'll
Okay,
try and think
that's
of
just
an answer.
fine.
What I'm most proud of and what I've worked hardest on is that I'm still me. I haven't conformed. I say what I want. Sometimes it doesn't work out for me. And I think I'm very proud that so that's probably personal. Um, with our clients, I'm going to give you a really wonky, boring example. I've been working on water policy for 12 years, and like, we
In
for
Utah specifically?
in Utah specifically, and we actually do a lot in the Intermountain West because the 7 states of the Intermountain West that share the Colorado River
Yeah,
matters. We were working on this when it was still boring. Like, now, some of us are paying attention to water,
we
but,
are.
and they're mostly engineers, and it's kind of boring, right? Like, and a lot of the work we're doing now, I would say, was seeded 12 years ago in the conference room at Exoro. And
Oh,
we were ahead of this for 7 states. And we built a large coalition. And this was a serious minded coalition. It wasn't in the public eye, not because I wasn't trying to be transparent. It didn't make deals, so it didn't need to be in the public eye. But it brought serious members to the table who weren't talking together. And
uh,
it brought
which
serious,
has to happen for good
yeah,
change.
with regional ideas. These guys are all 800-pound gorillas in their own right. You can't sit at the table in water unless you've been doing water for 53 years. So building credibility there was
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
challenging. And so
And you're a woman in Utah too.
yeah, and I feel really proud that I would say I've made a difference in this policy space. And we seeded that 12 years ago. And we've worked really hard. And what's happened is by the time it comes to a policymaker, an elected official in a public space, doesn't matter that we were there, but I can look at that and say,
And
I
you
know
know,
where that started. So long-term, hard public policy is I'm very proud of the work we're doing in infrastructure spaces and change spaces. I will also say I love women's stuff, and I, I'm not a cheerleader for women in a t-shirt way. It's hard. I
yeah,
think we get too identity focused because it's not an excuse. There is no reason.
yeah,
It's not an excuse, and so I think I stay in my own voice there, which is hard because you get in a peer group and you wanna be in that peer group. But I love women's issues. There's so much more for us.
yeah. Thank you. So there was a question, and I also had this same question, and you mentioned earlier, and you had a smirk on your face when you when you were talking about this, that you actually enjoy some level of conflict.
Sure, yeah,
So in all the topics that we're talking about, those four words, change and policy and politics and all of those things, there's just conflict. I mean, the conflict comes with everything. And we're so socialized, often as women, not just in Utah, but women, and maybe more in Utah, to not have contention, we call it,
yep,
or but contention's different than conflict, right?
yeah.
And disagreement is different than that. So you smile. Some people like conflict. We're okay stepping forward with that, but a lot of people are not. So talk a little bit about conflict, and have you had to get more comfortable with it, or was it natural? And what would you, I've asked you like 10 questions here. So what would you recommend?
So I may go to the end. Like, here's where women are really good.
Hmm,
We're good at navigating tough conversations. And conflict is just
true.
a really tough conversation, right? Like, conflict is sort of either battle, which is I'm not going to give up my tribal flag, you're not going to give up your tribal flag, and we're just going to yell at each other. I'm not interested in that. That kind of conflict, I'm not interested in. And I think that's where we go. We go with, like, I
Mhm.
don't want to be the one going toe to toe. But that end goal is to just win the shouting battle. So when I say conflict, I don't
That's
mind the
not
stuff.
helpful too.
It's
That's
not.
especially
So,
today. It's not
so the
helpful.
reframe is for someone who does, because I do actually not mind disagreeing. But if you're someone who still says, man, my wiring tells me not to do that, um, you are probably good at the tough conversation. We have it with our families. We're the ones that reconcile the irreconcilable. We're the ones that bring a little bit. There's three of us, and I'm the one that takes a little from you and a little from you until the two of them can talk. That's what conflict is.
Yeah,
So if we start to see public and business conversations instead of the lens of I'm not gregarious, I don't like conflict, I'm not, I don't, that's not how I use my brain doesn't work that way. I would say deal makers and brokers get into the fight. And so I
mm,
think that it's about be the steward of a tough conversation, right? Be the
mm.
facilitator of showing, reflecting back and showing the two sides. That's someone who's working through conflict. But the other thing, and Susan, you said this at the beginning, it, it's a traditionally masculine trait, and I'm unapologetic for having it. Like,
Yeah,
I don't mind. And so part of it is us saying to ourselves, yeah, I don't know, it's traditionally, I think part of the reason that I get along in a men's world is that some of my default spaces are traditionally masculine
yeah, yeah.
characteristics and traits.
I was raised with six brothers, so
Yeah, I have four. So
yeah,
it's like, so part of it is us owning how diverse we are, but more, I just say, you're right. I don't love the yelling at it. I don't love just yelling, but we can be quick. We can be, and I some people have even asked sort of, why do you stay in Utah fighting the fight? The answer to that is you fight the fight where the fight is, right? So,
True. I have had, can I just say, I've had many women, too many, in the past couple of years say, I can't be a woman in Utah anymore.
yeah,
I have to move. And they leave, they quit their positions, they move their family. And in my heart, it always saddens me because we need the voices here. We need the fight. And the fight is not always shouting. It's not, and thank you for the women in the suffrage movement, they
yeah.
pounded the door and they did some things, and that's one kind, and there's a need for that. But there are other kinds of avenues. What are we talking about? You know where I'm going with this. And
Yeah.
it may be conflict. Maybe there's another word. I think I think it's not compromise all the time. That's a piece of maybe.
We're needed here, and they don't get to decide if I'm needed here. They don't get it. So
Yeah.
part of it is who is controlling my decisions. You and I were joking, and we were asking each other before we got on how it's going. And I say this cheeky, but it's actually real. We have a rule in my household that we do not make life decisions during the legislative session, because every legislative session in Utah, I am packing my bags. But you know what? That's them controlling me. And so, like, the voice is needed. There's a question about like how to get involved from a community perspective. So this is going to be a lame answer that doesn't suit it, but one is just do it. And then when you find yourself not suited for that group, don't worry, move on to another. But
Yep.
like, at the governor's office, there's a bunch of boards and commissions. There's a person, a man assigned to it. They never fill enough boards and commissions.
Yep.
Every city mayor has boards and commissions. So that way, if you don't want to get into proper government, get on a board, run a park, put your name out there, go on non-traditional issues. I don't, my list of passions are actually non-traditional female passions. I don't gravitate to topics that are traditionally female.
Yeah.
And I, for a long time, felt apologetic about that. And I'm like, no, I don't, these are the
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah.
So
And
go
can I
join a,
just say,
yeah,
I mean, bolder way forward, if you ever want to engage, and I hope everybody does eventually, because we need to do that. And we can be engaged in bolder way forward just by knowing the statistics about domestic violence
yep.
or sexual assault or whatever, and talking to our families about it. But in counties around the state and various things, we are really needing people that are willing to lean in and say, this is part of my call.
But
This is
part of
part
it,
of my group.
connecting with people is persuasive. So it's
Yeah,
also
true.
okay to accept someone that just hurts you by what, like some of
Mm,
it hurts me. I totally disagree. So my choices are, I can either draw battle lines, and sometimes I do, but sometimes I'm like, if I can find space for them, I won't compromise. I won't, but I can find space, and I know I'm more persuasive. I know that if
mm,
I can connect with somebody, I can also influence them.
I love that. We've just got a few minutes left. What book, resource,
Mm.
what what would you recommend to people listening in today? Um,
I have I have a super bad answer. I don't read a lot of political books.
oh,
I, though, read autobiographies of people who inspire me,
oh,
listen to podcasts for things that lift you up. This is probably a moment in time for me. It's a moment in time where a lot of the stuff around me I'm worried about. And a lot of the voice that I'm hearing, I'm worried about. I love civics and I love American history. And right now in America, it is a really big struggle for me. So here's what I love poetry. If you've never read poetry, poetry is so powerful. I love communications. Take someone who in 10 words evoked an emotion. And this is a way of
mm,
discovering yourself. So if I had to give one recommendation right now, if you've never read poetry, pick a subject area you like. There's a group of amazing civil rights poets. Do it by genre, Native American, women, do it by nature, do it by English, do it by New Zealand has an amazing young poets who are really funky. So grab a book of poetry and force yourself to think that way. This is the opposite of social media and multitasking, which is where I live my life. And read two stanzas of somebody and challenge yourself to figure out what they're saying. It'll inspire your brain,
I
it'll
love this.
quiet your discontent, and it is beautiful. So I don't
I
have a specific, but I have a practice that I'm doing right
I
now.
love this. This is so different than what we've heard. And so I love that. Just someone in the number of comments in there, but we need to conclude. Um, so I'll pick one. How can we hear and learn more from uh, Mara? And
Goodness.
they said they'd enjoyed the discussion. So where do they go? And we'll send an email out after with probably the link to the quiet book and any resources you would like, and we can give a link to your firm. What else would you say?
I don't, if you just want to hear me argue with people, I do a CBS podcast once a week. I'll take two. I do the Hinckley Report regularly. But I'm also open for discussions. Anything Susan asks me to do, I will do. I do training with the Women's Leadership Institute.
Yeah.
I love women's discussions, and I think these matter. I think this is really important. So I'm open to have people reach out to me and seeing if I can connect with resources where I can. So I
Awesome.
am willing to help is probably the
Thank
best
you.
answer to.
What a delightful conversation.
This has
At
been
least
so
I'm
fun.
calling it delightful because I was here. And that what a fun conversation. And it's been fun too. We've known each other for a lot of years, but we haven't crossed as closely. Now I feel like you're my friend.
Exactly.
So I love that. And we'll send an email out to everybody. But thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.